What kind of hero does a nation choose to forget? What act of courage is so extraordinary, so inconvenient, so contrary to the official narrative that it must be hidden away for 7 decades? In the chaos of World War II, when millions fought and died across continents and oceans, one soldier performed a feat so remarkable that it should have made him a household name. Instead, his story was buried in classified files, his medals withheld, his name erased from the histories written in the war's aftermath. He saved 200 lives in a single day, risking everything to pull soldiers from certain death, and the military thanked him by ensuring the world would never know. His name was Desmond Doss, a conscientious objector who refused to carry a weapon into combat, who endured mockery and abuse from his fellow soldiers, who was nearly court-martialed for his beliefs. He was a man of profound religious conviction in an army that valued killing efficiency above all else. He was declared a coward by men who would later owe him their lives. And on a blood-soaked ridge in Okinawa, during one of the most brutal battles of the Pacific War, he proved that courage has nothing to do with how many enemies you kill, and everything to do with how many friends you save. The military's reluctance to celebrate Doss reveals uncomfortable truths about how institutions define heroism, about the tension between individual conscience and military necessity, about the stories we choose to tell and those we choose to suppress. This is not just the story of one man's extraordinary bravery. This is the story of why that bravery was deemed too problematic to celebrate, too complicated to fit into the neat narratives of wartime propaganda, too challenging to the fundamental assumptions about what it means to be a soldier. Desmond Thomas Doss was born on February 7, 1919, in Lynchburg, Virginia, into a working-class family shaped by both faith and hardship. His father, William Thomas Doss, was a carpenter who had served in World War I and returned home traumatized by the experience. The elder Doss struggled with alcoholism and violent outbursts, behavior that would profoundly influence his son's understanding of violence and its consequences. His mother, Bertha Edward Doss, was a devout Seventh-day Adventist whose faith provided the moral framework that would guide Desmond throughout his life. The Seventh-day Adventist Church, to which the Doss family belonged, adhered to strict interpretations of biblical commandments, particularly the prohibition against killing. The church taught that the 6th commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," applied absolutely without exception for warfare or self-defense. Adventists also observed the Saturday Sabbath, refusing to work or engage in secular activities from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. These beliefs placed Adventist soldiers in a peculiar position during wartime. They were willing to serve their country, but unwilling to take human life or violate the Sabbath. Young Desmond grew up with a framed picture on his family's wall that would shape his entire worldview. The image depicted the 10 Commandments with illustrations showing the consequences of violating each one. The illustration for the 6th commandment showed Cain killing Abel, brother murdering brother, the first act of human violence recorded in Scripture. Doss would later recall staring at that image and wondering how anyone could justify killing another human being, even in war. The picture became more than religious instruction. It became the foundation of his moral identity. When Desmond was young, he nearly killed his own brother during a childhood fight. The incident, which involved Desmond striking his brother with a brick in a moment of rage, horrified him when he realized how close he had come to becoming a murderer. The experience reinforced his commitment to non-violence and his determination never to take a human life under any circumstances. Similarly, when he witnessed his father threaten his mother with a gun during a drunken rage, and young Desmond hid the weapon to prevent violence, he understood viscerally the destructive power of weapons and the moral imperative to reject them. As World War II engulfed the globe, the question of military service became inescapable for young American men. The draft was instituted, and millions were called to serve. Desmond Doss faced a profound moral dilemma. His religious beliefs forbade him from killing or carrying weapons, but he also felt a deep patriotic duty to serve his country. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor had brought the war to America's doorstep, and Doss believed that defending one's country was a moral obligation even for a pacifist. The solution in Doss's mind was to serve as a medic. Combat medics went into battle alongside infantry soldiers but carried no weapons. Their mission was to save lives, not take them, to heal rather than harm. This role seemed perfectly suited to Doss's beliefs. He could serve his country, face the same dangers as other soldiers, but do so in a way that honored his religious convictions. When he received his draft notice in 1942, he registered as a conscientious objector, but specified that he was willing to serve in a non-combatant role. The designation conscientious objector was deeply controversial in wartime America. Public opinion largely viewed conscientious objectors as cowards, as men who wanted to avoid the dangers of combat while hiding behind religious excuses. The term carried a stigma that would follow Doss throughout his military service. Even within the category of conscientious objectors, Doss's position was unusual. Many COs refused all military service and were assigned to civilian work camps or alternative service. Doss, however, insisted on serving in combat as a medic. He wanted to face the same dangers as other soldiers, just without carrying a weapon. When Doss reported for basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, in April 1942, he entered a world profoundly hostile to everything he represented. The Army was an institution built on hierarchy, obedience, and the efficient application of violence. A soldier who refused to carry a weapon was an anomaly, a problem, a potential weakness in the chain of command. Doss's fellow trainees and his officers viewed him with suspicion, contempt, and outright hostility. The abuse began almost immediately. Soldiers mocked him as a coward, called him names, questioned his masculinity and his patriotism. Some engaged in physical intimidation, hoping to force him to quit. Officers attempted to have him discharged from the service, arguing that a soldier who wouldn't carry a weapon had no place in the Army. When Doss refused to train on Saturdays due to his Sabbath observance, the harassment intensified. He was given the worst duties, denied leave, subjected to investigations into his fitness for service. The psychological warfare against Doss was systematic and severe. Fellow soldiers would leave their rifles for him to clean, testing whether he would handle weapons. They would schedule essential training on Saturdays, knowing he would refuse to participate. They would create situations designed to humiliate him or force him to compromise his principles. Some threatened him with violence. Others simply shunned him, treating him as an outsider who didn't belong. Captain Jack Glover, one of Doss's commanding officers, initially believed that Doss had no place in the Army and worked to have him discharged. Glover saw Doss's refusal to carry a weapon as a liability that would endanger other soldiers. In combat, Glover reasoned, every man needed to be able to defend himself and his unit. A medic without a weapon was not just useless, but actively dangerous, requiring others to protect him, while he couldn't contribute to the unit's fighting capability. The Army attempted to discharge Doss on psychiatric grounds, arguing that his religious beliefs constituted a mental deficiency that made him unfit for service. Doss fought the discharge, insisting that his beliefs were sincere and that he had a right to serve his country according to his conscience. The legal battle was complicated by the fact that Doss had not applied for 1AO classification, conscientious objector willing to serve in non-combatant role, before being drafted, and some officials questioned whether his religious convictions were genuine or merely a convenient excuse to avoid combat. Despite the abuse and the administrative efforts to remove him, Doss persisted. He completed basic training and advanced medical training, becoming a skilled combat medic. He learned to treat wounds, perform triage, administer morphine, stop bleeding, and stabilize patients for evacuation. His medical skills were never in question, only his willingness to be a complete soldier in the Army's eyes. He was assigned to the 77th Infantry Division, known as the Statue of Liberty Division, which would see heavy combat in the Pacific Theater. The men of Doss's company in the 77th Division initially shared the skepticism and hostility of his basic training cohort. They questioned whether a medic without a weapon could be trusted in combat, whether he would freeze under fire, whether his religious convictions would evaporate when faced with the reality of battle. Some refused to train with him. Others made clear they would not protect him if they came under fire. The unit cohesion that was essential to combat effectiveness was compromised by the presence of a soldier whom many viewed as fundamentally different and potentially unreliable. But Doss remained committed to his principles and to proving that he could serve effectively without compromising his beliefs. He volunteered for the most dangerous assignments during training. He worked harder than anyone else to master medical techniques. He demonstrated physical courage and mental toughness in training exercises. Slowly, grudgingly, some of his fellow soldiers began to respect his dedication, even if they didn't understand his beliefs. The 77th Division deployed to the Pacific in 1944, assigned to the island hopping campaign that was slowly pushing Japanese forces back toward their home islands. The division saw combat in Guam and Leyte in the Philippines, where Doss had his first experiences of actual battle. In these engagements, he demonstrated his courage and competence as a medic, treating wounded soldiers under fire, evacuating casualties while bullets flew around him, remaining calm and effective in the chaos of combat. It was during these earlier battles that Doss began to earn the respect of his fellow soldiers. They saw him run toward danger rather than away from it, saw him treat wounded men without regard for his own safety, saw him remain steady when others panicked. The abstract question of whether a medic without a weapon could be trusted in combat was answered by his actions. He could be trusted. He was brave. He was effective. The religious beliefs that had made him an outcast became, in the eyes of his comrades, the source of a different kind of strength. But it would be on Okinawa in the spring of 1945 that Desmond Doss would face his greatest test and perform the feat that should have made him a legend. The Battle of Okinawa was one of the bloodiest engagements of the entire war, a preview of what the invasion of mainland Japan would entail. The Japanese defenders fought with suicidal determination, knowing that Okinawa was the last major obstacle before the American invasion of their homeland. Every ridge, every cave, every fortification was defended to the death. The broader context of the war shaped everything that would happen on Okinawa. By early 1945, Japan was clearly losing. American forces had captured island after island across the Pacific, moving inexorably closer to the Japanese home islands. American submarines had strangled Japan's maritime supply lines. American bombers were systematically destroying Japanese cities, but Japan refused to surrender, and the fanatical resistance on islands like Iwo Jima demonstrated that invading the home islands would result in catastrophic casualties on both sides. Okinawa was the last stepping stone before the invasion of Japan itself. The island's location made it strategically vital, close enough to Japan to serve as a base for the final invasion, large enough to accommodate massive staging areas for troops and supplies. The Japanese understood Okinawa's importance and had fortified it extensively. They had months to prepare defenses, dig tunnels, position artillery, and organize their forces. They were ready to make the Americans pay in blood for every foot of ground. The Battle of Okinawa began on April 1, 1945, with the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War. Nearly 200,000 American troops landed on the island, facing approximately 100,000 Japanese defenders, who had transformed the island into a fortress of interlocking defenses, underground tunnels, and carefully prepared killing zones. The Japanese strategy was to inflict maximum casualties on the Americans, hoping to make the cost of invading Japan so prohibitive that the United States would seek a negotiated peace rather than complete conquest. The 77th Infantry Division was assigned to capture the Maida Escarpment, a steep 400-foot high ridge that the Americans called Hacksaw Ridge due to its jagged, saw-toothed appearance. The ridge was a formidable natural fortress with sheer cliffs that made climbing difficult and exposed attackers to devastating fire from Japanese defenders positioned in caves and bunkers along the ridgetop. The Japanese had prepared the position carefully, with interlocking fields of fire, hidden artillery positions and underground tunnels that allowed them to move troops and supplies while remaining invisible to American observers. The assault on Hacksaw Ridge began on April 29, 1945. American troops had to climb cargo nets up the cliff face while under constant fire from Japanese defenders. The ridgetop was a moonscape of shell craters, destroyed trees, and churned earth. Visibility was limited by smoke and dust. The fighting was intimate and brutal. Grenades thrown into caves, flamethrowers clearing bunkers, hand-to-hand combat in the ruined landscape. Casualties were horrific, with soldiers cut down as they reached the top of the cliff or as they tried to advance across the open ground of the ridge. Desmond Doss went up Hacksaw Ridge with his company, carrying his medical supplies, but no weapon. As the battle raged around him, he moved through the chaos treating wounded soldiers. When men fell, he ran to them, assessed their wounds, applied bandages and tourniquets, administered morphine, and called for litter bearers to evacuate them down the cliff. The danger was constant. Japanese snipers targeted medics, knowing that killing the medic would demoralize the unit and leave wounded soldiers to die. Machine gun fire swept across the ridge. Mortar rounds fell randomly, sending shrapnel flying. Grenades exploded without warning. As the day wore on, the American position on the ridge became untenable. The Japanese launched counterattacks, and American forces were in danger of being overrun. The order came to retreat, to abandon the ridge top and regroup for another assault. Soldiers began pulling back, moving toward the cliff edge and the cargo nets that would allow them to descend to safety. But the retreat was chaotic, and wounded soldiers were scattered across the ridge, many unable to move on their own. This was the moment when Desmond Doss made the decision that would define his life and his legacy. As other soldiers retreated, Doss remained on the ridge, refusing to leave the wounded behind. While bullets cracked around him and explosions shook the ground, he moved from casualty to casualty, treating wounds, comforting the dying, and dragging or carrying soldiers toward the cliff edge. When he reached the edge with a wounded soldier, he would lower the man down the cliff using a rope sling system he improvised, then return to the ridge to find another casualty. The process was methodical and exhausting. Each wounded soldier had to be located, treated enough to survive the evacuation, dragged or carried across open ground while under fire, secured in the rope sling, and lowered down the 400-foot cliff. Then, Doss would pull up the rope and return to find another casualty. The Japanese were still on the ridge, still firing, still dangerous. Doss had no weapon to defend himself. If he encountered Japanese soldiers, he would die. But he continued anyway, driven by a commitment to save lives that exceeded his concern for his own survival. As he worked, Doss prayed. With each soldier he pulled to safety, he repeated a simple prayer: "Dear God, help me get one more. Help me get just one more." The prayer became a mantra, a way of breaking down the overwhelming task into manageable pieces. He didn't think about saving everyone. He focused on saving one more, then one more, then one more. Hour after hour, as darkness fell and the ridge grew quiet, Doss continued his work. The physical demands of what Doss accomplished are difficult to comprehend. Each wounded soldier weighed between 150 and 200 pounds, plus the weight of equipment and gear. Doss had to drag or carry these men across terrain torn by artillery, cratered by explosions, littered with debris and bodies. He had to navigate in smoke and darkness, avoiding Japanese positions, finding routes to the cliff edge. Then he had to lower each man down a 400-foot cliff using improvised rope systems, ensuring they didn't injure themselves further during the descent. The psychological toll was equally immense. Doss was surrounded by death and suffering. He saw men with catastrophic wounds, missing limbs, gaping chest wounds, abdominal injuries that exposed intestines. He heard the screams of the wounded, the cries for help, the prayers and curses of dying men. He smelled blood, cordite, and burning flesh. He operated in constant fear that the next bullet or shell would kill him, yet he maintained his focus and his commitment, treating each casualty with care and lowering each man to safety with methodical precision. Estimates of how many soldiers Doss saved that day vary. Doss himself estimated he had evacuated approximately 50 men. His comrades believed the number was much higher, perhaps 75 or even 100. When the army conducted its after-action analysis, they split the difference and officially credited Doss with saving 75 lives. But this number only counted the men evacuated from Hacksaw Ridge on that single day. Over the course of the entire Okinawa campaign, Doss repeatedly risked his life to save wounded soldiers, treating and evacuating casualties in multiple engagements. The total number of soldiers whose lives Doss saved during his time on Okinawa was likely around 200, when accounting for all the battles in which he participated and all the wounded he treated. The official citation would recognize the Hacksaw Ridge evacuation as his most extraordinary feat, but his courage and effectiveness as a medic extended throughout the campaign. He became known throughout the 77th Division as someone who would come for you if you were wounded, who wouldn't leave you behind, who could be trusted to risk his life for yours. The testimony of soldiers who witnessed Doss's actions on Hacksaw Ridge is consistent and overwhelming. They describe him moving through hellish conditions with supernatural calm, treating wounds while bullets struck the ground around him, dragging men twice his size across open ground, lowering casualties down the cliff with improvisational genius. Some thought he would surely be killed and were astonished each time he reappeared with another casualty. Others credited divine protection, believing that God was shielding Doss so he could complete his mission of mercy. One soldier recalled watching Doss treat his wounds while a Japanese machine gunner fired at them from less than 50 yards away. Bullets kicked up dirt around them, but Doss remained calm, applying a tourniquet and administering morphine before dragging the wounded man to safety. Another soldier described being certain he would die on the ridge until he heard Doss's voice telling him he would be okay. That help was here. The psychological impact of knowing that Doss was on the ridge, that he would come for wounded men, gave soldiers courage to continue fighting. The Japanese defenders on Hacksaw Ridge were equally aware of Doss. Some tried specifically to kill him, recognizing that the medic was keeping American casualties alive and maintaining American morale. But despite being targeted repeatedly, despite operating in exposed positions for hours, Doss survived the day without a scratch. His survival seemed miraculous to those who witnessed it, reinforcing the belief that divine intervention was protecting him. On May 21, 1945, Doss's service came to a sudden and violent end. He was treating a wounded soldier when a grenade landed nearby. Doss threw himself on the wounded man to shield him from the blast, taking shrapnel in his legs and lower body. The wounds were severe enough to require evacuation. As he waited for litter bearers to carry him to an aid station, the position came under tank fire. Seeing another soldier more critically wounded, Doss rolled off his litter and insisted that the other man be evacuated first. While waiting for the litter bearers to return, he was struck in the arm by a sniper's bullet that shattered his bone. Doss treated his own wounds, fashioning a splint for his shattered arm from a rifle stock, one of the few times he ever handled a weapon, and only to use it as a medical tool. He endured a 5-hour crawl to an aid station, where doctors stabilized him for evacuation off the island. His combat service was over. He would spend months in hospitals recovering from his wounds, undergoing surgeries to repair his arm and remove shrapnel from his body. The injuries left him partially disabled for life. While Doss recovered in the hospital, word of his actions on Hacksaw Ridge spread through the military hierarchy. His commanding officers, who had once sought to discharge him as unfit for service, now recommended him for the nation's highest military honor. Captain Jack Glover, who had been Doss's most severe critic during training, wrote passionately about Doss's courage and effectiveness as a medic. The recommendation worked its way up through channels, gathering endorsements at each level, until it reached the desk of President Harry S. Truman. On October 12, 1945, Desmond Doss stood on the White House lawn in his Army uniform, his arm still in a sling from his wounds. President Truman draped the Medal of Honor around his neck, making Doss the first conscientious objector to receive the nation's highest military decoration. The citation praised his outstanding bravery and unflinching determination in the face of desperately dangerous conditions, and his gallant determination to serve his country while adhering to his religious convictions. The Medal of Honor ceremony should have made Doss famous. His story was extraordinary. A man who refused to carry a weapon, saving dozens of lives through pure courage and determination. It was a narrative that could inspire a nation, that could demonstrate the power of faith and conviction, that could show that heroism comes in many forms. But instead of celebration, Doss's story received remarkably little attention. The military did not promote his story widely. No major films were made about him. He did not become a household name. For decades, his story remained largely unknown outside military circles. The lack of widespread recognition was not accidental. It reflected deeper tensions within military culture and American society about the nature of heroism, the role of religion in military service, and the acceptability of conscientious objection. Doss's heroism was undeniable, but it was also profoundly uncomfortable for an institution built on the premise that soldiers must be willing to kill. His story challenged fundamental assumptions and raised questions that the military preferred not to confront publicly. The military's reluctance to celebrate Desmond Doss as a hero reveals the complicated relationship between institutions and individuals who challenge institutional norms. Doss was undeniably brave, undeniably effective, undeniably worthy of honor. But his heroism was inconvenient because it challenged fundamental assumptions about what it means to be a soldier and what kind of courage the military values. The core tension was philosophical. The military is an institution designed to apply organized violence in service of national objectives. Soldiers are trained to kill efficiently, to follow orders without hesitation, to value aggression and martial prowess. The ideal soldier in this framework is someone who can engage and destroy the enemy while maintaining discipline and cohesion. Weapons are the tools of the trade, and proficiency with weapons is essential to military effectiveness. Doss rejected this entire framework. He insisted that it was possible to be a soldier without carrying a weapon, to serve effectively in combat, without participating in killing, to demonstrate courage through saving lives rather than taking them. His very presence in the army challenged the institution's core values and raised uncomfortable questions. If one soldier could serve heroically without a weapon, did that suggest that weapons and killing were less central to military service than the institution claimed? If courage could be demonstrated through medical service rather than combat, did that undermine the special status accorded to infantrymen and combat veterans? Military institutions are inherently conservative, resistant to change, protective of traditions and established hierarchies. Innovation is accepted when it improves combat effectiveness. Better weapons, better tactics, better logistics. But innovation that challenges the fundamental nature of soldiering is resisted. Doss represented a radical challenge to the military's self-concept, and institutions don't easily celebrate those who fundamentally question what the institution is about. The religious dimension of Doss's story added another layer of complexity. The United States military has always had to navigate the relationship between religious faith and military service. The military respects religious faith and provides chaplains to support soldiers' spiritual needs. But the military also requires soldiers to set aside personal beliefs when they conflict with military necessity. A soldier cannot refuse to fight on religious grounds. A soldier cannot selectively obey orders based on theological interpretations. The military's mission takes precedence over individual conscience. Doss's insistence on adhering to his religious convictions, even in combat, represented a form of insubordination, disguised as faithful service. He was saying, in effect, that his understanding of God's commands superseded the army's orders. He would serve, but only on his terms, only in ways that didn't violate his interpretation of Scripture. The military had allowed him to serve as a medic, but this was a practical accommodation, not an endorsement of his theology or his challenge to military authority. Celebrating Doss as a hero required acknowledging that individual conscience could override institutional requirements, that personal faith could take precedence over military orders, that soldiers could selectively determine which aspects of military service they would participate in. The implications were troubling for military discipline. If Doss could refuse to carry a weapon and still be honored, could other soldiers refuse other duties based on religious or moral objections? Where would the line be drawn? The practical argument against promoting Doss's story was that it might encourage other soldiers to become conscientious objectors or to refuse combat duties. The military needs soldiers willing to fight and kill. If young men believed they could serve honorably as medics without carrying weapons, recruitment and retention might suffer. The romanticization of Doss's pacifism might undermine the military's ability to prepare soldiers psychologically for the brutal realities of combat. Better to honor Doss quietly, recognize his bravery without making him a poster child for alternatives to traditional military service. There was also a darker undercurrent to the military's ambivalence about Doss. His story highlighted the degree to which the military had mistreated him before he proved his worth. Officers had tried to discharge him, fellow soldiers had abused him, the institution had questioned his patriotism and fitness for service. Then, when crisis came, this man whom the military had deemed inadequate proved to be one of the bravest and most effective soldiers in the division. The military's poor treatment of Doss before his heroism was revealed did not reflect well on the institution's judgment or values. To celebrate Doss widely would be to implicitly acknowledge that the military had been wrong about him, that the abuse and discrimination he faced were unjust, that the institution's prejudices had nearly cost the army one of its greatest heroes. Institutions don't like to admit mistakes, especially mistakes rooted in the institution's core values and operating assumptions. Easier to give Doss his medal and let the story fade than to use his story as a vehicle for examining institutional failures. The timing of Doss's heroism also worked against widespread celebration of his story. The war in the Pacific ended shortly after Doss's evacuation from Okinawa. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 forced Japan's surrender, eliminating the need for the invasion of the Japanese home islands that would have resulted in massive casualties. The end of World War II brought relief, celebration, and a desire to move on from the trauma of war rather than to dwell on individual stories of combat. Furthermore, the narrative of American victory in World War II emphasized overwhelming force, technological superiority, and the courage of soldiers willing to close with and destroy the enemy. Stories of paratroopers jumping into Normandy, Marines storming Pacific beaches, bomber crews striking deep into enemy territory. These fit the narrative of American military might. Doss's story of saving lives through non-violent courage didn't fit as neatly into the triumphalist narrative of American power projecting across the globe. The Cold War that followed World War II reinforced the military's emphasis on strength, weapons, and the willingness to use force. The United States faced an ideological and military competition with the Soviet Union that required projecting an image of power and resolve. Pacifism, even the qualified pacifism of a combat medic who served bravely, seemed out of step with the requirements of deterring Soviet aggression and maintaining American global leadership. Additionally, the treatment of conscientious objectors in American society complicated efforts to celebrate Doss. Many Americans viewed COs as cowards or traitors who had shirked their duty while others fought and died. Veterans organizations were often hostile to conscientious objectors. Political leaders were wary of appearing to endorse pacifism or to undermine military recruitment. Even within religious communities, opinions were divided about whether pacifism was a legitimate Christian stance or a misunderstanding of biblical teaching. Doss himself contributed to his relative obscurity through his humility and his reluctance to seek publicity. After the war, he returned to civilian life and lived quietly. He didn't write memoirs, didn't go on speaking tours, didn't seek to leverage his Medal of Honor into fame or fortune. He worked as a carpenter and lived simply, attending his Seventh-day Adventist church and avoiding the spotlight. When asked about his wartime service, he deflected credit, insisting that God deserved the glory and that he had simply done his duty as a Christian. His medical issues from his wartime service also limited his public profile. The wounds he sustained on Okinawa left him partially disabled. He lost a lung to tuberculosis, contracted during his recovery. He dealt with chronic pain and limited mobility. He suffered from hearing loss caused by the blast that wounded him. These health problems made extensive public appearances difficult and kept him focused on managing his health and supporting his family rather than promoting his story. For decades, Doss lived in relative obscurity, known primarily within military circles and among Seventh-day Adventists, but largely unknown to the broader American public. The occasional article would mention him, and he was honored at veterans events, but he never achieved the fame of Audie Murphy, Alvin York, or other celebrated war heroes. His story remained classified in the sense that it was buried in archives, untold in history classes, absent from popular culture. The institutional factors that kept Doss's story buried were reinforced by practical considerations. Creating narratives around war heroes requires documentation, photography, film footage, and compelling storytelling. While Doss's actions were documented in after-action reports and witness testimony, there was no dramatic film footage of him lowering soldiers down Hacksaw Ridge. The story required careful explanation of his religious beliefs and the context of conscientious objection, making it more complex than simple tales of battlefield valor. Moreover, the military's public relations apparatus during and after World War II was focused on promoting stories that supported recruitment, boosted morale, and reinforced the image of American military prowess. Stories were selected based on their propaganda value and their alignment with institutional messaging priorities. Doss's story, while heroic, didn't serve these institutional purposes as effectively as more conventional combat narratives. The complexity of his conscientious objection and the challenge his story posed to military values made it less attractive as propaganda material. The cultural context of the 1940s and 1950s also played a role. American society during this period emphasized conformity, traditional masculinity, and unwavering patriotism. The Cold War mentality viewed questioning or challenging authority with suspicion. Doss's story, with its emphasis on individual conscience trumping institutional demands, its celebration of non-violence in a violent context, and its suggestion that heroism could take unconventional forms, didn't resonate with the dominant cultural themes of the era. The eventual emergence of Desmond Doss's story into public consciousness took decades and required changing cultural contexts that made his particular brand of heroism more acceptable to mainstream audiences. The process of recovering and celebrating his story reveals how historical narratives evolve and how heroes can be rediscovered when the political and cultural climate becomes more receptive. The first significant public attention to Doss's story came through Seventh-day Adventist channels. The church, proud of one of their members who had lived out their values so dramatically, produced a documentary called The Conscientious Objector in 2004. The film told Doss's story through interviews, archival footage, and dramatic recreations. It was distributed primarily through religious networks and reached audiences already sympathetic to Adventist theology and pacifist principles. The documentary served an important function in preserving Doss's story and bringing it to new generations. Many younger Americans had never heard of him, and even within the military, his story had faded into the background of World War II history. The film reminded viewers that heroism comes in many forms and that courage can be demonstrated through saving lives rather than taking them. It also provided Doss an opportunity to tell his own story in his own words, preserving his testimony before his death in 2006. The breakthrough into mainstream consciousness came in 2016 with the release of Hacksaw Ridge, directed by Mel Gibson and starring Andrew Garfield as Desmond Doss. The film was a major Hollywood production with significant marketing and wide theatrical release. It presented Doss's story as an inspiring tale of faith, courage, and conviction, emphasizing the dramatic tension between his religious beliefs and the demands of military service, and culminating in the spectacular heroism of the Hacksaw Ridge evacuation. Hacksaw Ridge was both a critical and commercial success. It received 6 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture and Best Director, and won Oscars for Best Film Editing and Best Sound Mixing. The film grossed over $175 million worldwide, vastly exceeding its budget and demonstrating that there was significant public appetite for Doss's story. Suddenly, 70 years after his heroic actions, Desmond Doss became a household name. The success of Hacksaw Ridge raises interesting questions about why Doss's story resonated in 2016 in ways it hadn't immediately after the war. Part of the answer lies in changing cultural attitudes toward war, religion, and heroism. The United States had spent the previous 15 years engaged in conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan that many Americans viewed as morally ambiguous and strategically questionable. The clear-cut narrative of World War II as a just war against fascism had given way to complicated counterinsurgency campaigns that raised difficult questions about American power and its application. In this context, a story about a hero who refused to carry a weapon but served courageously anyway appealed to audiences struggling with the morality of American military interventions. Doss represented an alternative model of military service, one that acknowledged the complexity of violence and the possibility of serving one's country without compromising one's moral convictions. His story allowed audiences to celebrate military courage while maintaining reservations about military violence. The religious dimension of Doss's story also resonated differently in 2016 than it would have in 1945. American Christianity had become increasingly diverse, with evangelical and fundamentalist movements emphasizing personal faith and biblical literalism alongside more liberal theological traditions. Doss's unwavering commitment to his interpretation of Scripture appealed to religious audiences who valued faith-based conviction in an increasingly secular culture. His willingness to endure abuse and persecution for his beliefs made him a model of religious courage. The film's release also coincided with broader cultural conversations about conscientious objection, moral courage, and the rights of individuals to follow their conscience even when it conflicts with institutional demands. Debates about religious freedom, about the balance between individual liberty and collective responsibility, about when civil disobedience is justified. All of these contemporary controversies gave Doss's story contemporary relevance. He became a symbol for the proposition that individuals can maintain their moral integrity even within institutions that demand conformity. The military's response to the renewed attention to Doss's story was generally positive, suggesting that institutional attitudes had evolved over the decades. Military leaders praised Doss as an example of courage and selfless service. The Army highlighted his story in training materials, discussing the role of medics and the importance of values-based leadership. The Pentagon hosted screenings of Hacksaw Ridge and used the film as an opportunity to discuss medical service and military ethics. This institutional embrace of Doss's story represents a significant shift from the ambivalence and reluctance that characterized the military's initial response to his heroism. The shift reflects several factors. First, enough time had passed that celebrating Doss no longer felt like a critique of the World War II military establishment, Most of the officers who had mistreated him or questioned his fitness for service were long dead. Second, the all-volunteer military of the 21st century faced different recruiting challenges than the conscription-based military of World War II, and Doss's story could appeal to potential recruits who wanted to serve but were uncomfortable with combat roles. Third, the military had become more accepting of religious diversity and more accommodating of soldiers' religious practices. The institutional culture had evolved to better balance the demands of military service with respect for individual faith. Celebrating Doss could signal this evolution and demonstrate the military's commitment to supporting soldiers' religious convictions within the bounds of operational effectiveness. The lessons drawn from Doss's story are multiple and significant. For military institutions, his story demonstrates that courage comes in many forms and that soldiers can make extraordinary contributions even when they don't fit the traditional warrior mold. The medic who runs into danger to save lives demonstrates the same courage as the soldier who charges an enemy position. Service to one's comrades can be as valuable as destruction of the enemy. For religious communities, Doss's story validates the possibility of maintaining faith convictions even in the most challenging circumstances. He proved that it was possible to serve one's country without compromising one's understanding of religious obligations, that conscientious objection to violence didn't require refusing all forms of military service, that faith and patriotism could coexist even when they seemed to be in tension. For broader society, Doss's story challenges simplistic categories of coward and hero, pacifist and warrior. He was a conscientious objector who was braver than most soldiers. He was a pacifist who saved more lives than most combat veterans. He was a man of peace who served in one of the most violent battles in human history. His story resists easy categorization and forces audiences to think more deeply about courage, conviction, and moral complexity. The educational value of Doss's story extends into multiple domains. In military training, his example can be used to teach about the importance of medics, the courage required for medical service, and the ways that different roles contribute to unit effectiveness. In religious education, his story illustrates the possibility of living one's faith authentically, even in hostile environments. In ethics courses, his example raises important questions about individual conscience, institutional authority, and the limits of obedience. The story also has relevance for contemporary debates about religious freedom and accommodation. Doss's insistence on Sabbath observance and his refusal to carry weapons based on religious conviction parallel current controversies about religious exemptions from various laws and regulations. His successful service, despite these accommodations, suggests that institutions can respect religious diversity without compromising their core missions. However, his extraordinary heroism also sets a very high bar for what society might expect from those seeking religious accommodations. The belated recognition of Desmond Doss's heroism invites critical reflection on how societies remember war, construct narratives of heroism, and determine which stories deserve to be told. The 70 years between his actions on Hacksaw Ridge and his widespread recognition represent a failure of historical memory, a failure with roots in institutional biases, cultural prejudices, and the political uses of war narratives. The military's initial reluctance to promote Doss's story reveals the extent to which institutions define heroism in self-serving ways. Military heroism traditionally emphasizes aggression, lethality, and the destruction of enemy forces. Awards and decorations are structured around body counts and tactical victories. Even the Medal of Honor, while it recognizes many forms of courage, including life-saving actions, tends to be associated with offensive action against the enemy. Doss's heroism was entirely defensive and non-lethal. He killed no enemy soldiers, he destroyed no enemy equipment, he captured no territory. By conventional metrics of military success, his actions on Hacksaw Ridge contributed nothing to defeating the Japanese or winning the battle, yet his actions saved more lives and required more courage than those of soldiers who killed dozens of enemy troops. The military's difficulty in celebrating his heroism reflects institutional biases about what kind of contribution matters most. The religious aspect of Doss's story also highlights tensions between institutional authority and individual conscience that extend far beyond military contexts. Doss insisted that his understanding of God's commands superseded human authority, including military authority. He was willing to obey orders as long as they didn't conflict with his interpretation of biblical law, but when orders conflicted with his faith took precedence. This stance is fundamentally subversive to any institution that requires obedience and uniformity. The question of when individual conscience should override institutional demands remains contentious across many contexts. Doctors who refuse to perform certain procedures based on religious objections, government officials who refuse to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples, soldiers who refuse to participate in operations they view as immoral, all of these situations involve individuals claiming that their personal moral or religious convictions exempt them from institutional obligations. Doss's story can be invoked to support such claims, but it can also be used to question them. The difference, perhaps, is that Doss didn't simply refuse his duties. He performed alternative service that was arguably more valuable than what was asked of him. He didn't carry a weapon, but he saved lives in ways that armed soldiers couldn't. He didn't seek exemption from danger, but rather volunteered for the most dangerous assignments. His conscientious objection was paired with extraordinary service, not with avoidance of service. This combination made his moral stance more defensible, but also created a standard that most conscientious objectors cannot meet. The comparison between Doss and other conscientious objectors during World War II is instructive. Many COs were assigned to civilian public service camps, where they performed forestry work, fought fires, or served as test subjects in medical experiments. Their service was valuable, but not dramatic. They faced social stigma and were often viewed as cowards who avoided the real sacrifices of war. Some COs served prison sentences rather than participate in the war effort in any capacity. Very few COs served in combat roles, and fewer still distinguished themselves as Doss did. The fact that it took a Medal of Honor and saving dozens of lives under fire for one conscientious objector to gain acceptance and recognition suggests how high the bar was set for pacifists to prove their courage. Ordinary COs who served honorably but less dramatically remained stigmatized. The message seemed to be that pacifists could only be respected if they demonstrated extraordinary heroism that exceeded what was expected of ordinary soldiers. This double standard reveals the depth of cultural bias against conscientious objection. The treatment Doss endured before proving himself also warrants critical examination. He was mocked, threatened, physically intimidated, and subjected to administrative actions designed to force him out of the army. His superior officers attempted to have him declared mentally unfit for service. Fellow soldiers made his life miserable through deliberate harassment. All of this occurred because he held religious beliefs that the military found inconvenient. If Doss had been killed early in his service, or if he had been successfully discharged before proving his worth in combat, he would be remembered, if at all, as another troublesome, conscientious objector who couldn't adapt to military requirements. The fact that he became a hero vindicates his decision to persist despite the abuse, but it doesn't excuse the abuse itself. The military's mistreatment of Doss before he proved his worth reveals institutional intolerance for difference and a failure to recognize that alternative forms of service could be valuable. The question of how many other potential heroes were lost because they couldn't endure the abuse Doss suffered, or because they were successfully driven out of the military before they could prove their worth, is unanswerable but important. How many soldiers with unconventional approaches or alternative perspectives were silenced by institutional pressure to conform? How many innovations in tactics, strategy, or ethics were suppressed because they didn't fit established patterns? Doss succeeded despite the institution, not because of it, and his success should prompt reflection on how institutional culture can stifle rather than develop talent and courage. The role of religious prejudice in Doss's treatment also deserves attention. Seventh-day Adventists were and remain a relatively small denomination with distinctive beliefs that mainstream Christianity often views with suspicion. Adventist theology emphasizes the imminent return of Christ, the importance of Saturday Sabbath observance, and distinctive dietary and lifestyle practices. In mid-20th century America, Adventists were sometimes viewed as a cult or fringe group rather than a legitimate Christian denomination. The harassment Doss faced was not just about his refusal to carry a weapon, but also about his religious identity as an Adventist. His insistence on Sabbath observance, his dietary restrictions, his theological views, all of these marked him as different and contributed to his outsider status. The military's lack of accommodation for his religious practices and the contempt expressed by fellow soldiers reflected broader cultural biases against religious minorities. The evolution in military policy regarding religious accommodation since World War II has been significant. The modern military makes greater efforts to accommodate diverse religious practices, providing kosher and halal meals, allowing religious headwear and beards in some circumstances, and generally demonstrating more respect for religious diversity. But these accommodations came slowly and often required advocacy and litigation. Doss's persistence in maintaining his religious practices despite institutional hostility helped pave the way for later accommodations. The broader question of pacifism and just war theory also frames Doss's story. Christianity has always struggled with the tension between Jesus' teachings about nonviolence and the reality that Christians have often found themselves in positions where violence seemed necessary to protect the innocent or defend against aggression. Just war theory, developed by theologians like Augustine and Aquinas, provides criteria for determining when warfare can be morally justified and how it should be conducted. Doss's position was more absolute than just war theory. He didn't argue that World War II was unjust. On the contrary, he believed strongly that Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan needed to be defeated. He simply argued that his personal obligation not to kill was absolute, regardless of the justness of the cause. He was willing to contribute to the war effort in non-lethal ways, but wouldn't compromise his understanding of the Sixth Commandment. This position is philosophically coherent, but practically challenging. The challenge is that modern warfare requires many people willing to use lethal force. If everyone adopted Doss's position, wars couldn't be fought, which might seem desirable until one considers that some wars, like World War II, have prevented even greater evils. The ability to use military force to stop genocide, to defend against aggression, to protect vulnerable populations depends on having soldiers willing to kill. A world of Desmond Dosses would be very peaceful, but potentially unable to resist totalitarianism or mass atrocities. This doesn't invalidate Doss's moral stance, but it does highlight the tension between individual conscience and collective security. Democracy depends on individuals following their conscience and refusing to participate in unjust actions. But democracy also depends on citizens accepting collective obligations and contributing to common defense. Balancing these requirements is difficult, and Doss's story doesn't resolve the tension so much as illustrate it dramatically. The comparison with other Medal of Honor recipients is also revealing. Most Medal of Honor citations describe offensive action, soldiers charging enemy positions, destroying enemy equipment, killing large numbers of enemy troops. Doss's citation is unusual in that it describes entirely defensive and life-saving actions. This difference highlights how the military conceptualizes valor and how it rewards different types of courage. Some might argue that Doss's Medal of Honor was given in part to validate the military's treatment of conscientious objectors and to demonstrate institutional tolerance for religious diversity. By honoring Doss, the military could claim that it respected individual conscience and accommodated religious beliefs. This interpretation suggests that the medal served institutional purposes beyond recognizing individual heroism. Whether or not this cynical reading is accurate, it's certainly true that Doss's recognition served multiple functions, honoring genuine heroism while also allowing the institution to present itself in a more favorable light. Desmond Doss returned from the war broken in body, but unbroken in spirit. The wounds he sustained on Okinawa left him partially disabled for life. He lost hearing in one ear from the grenade blast. He lost a lung to tuberculosis contracted during his hospitalization. He endured more than a dozen surgeries to repair damage from shrapnel and bullets. His left arm never fully recovered from the shattered bone, but he never expressed regret about his service or his decisions. He had done what he believed God called him to do, and he had saved lives. That was enough. He married Dorothy Schutter, whom he had courted before the war, and they raised a son together. He worked as a carpenter when his health permitted, using the skills his father had taught him. He remained active in his Seventh-day Adventist church, teaching Sabbath school and sharing his testimony when asked. He lived simply and modestly, never seeking wealth or fame. The Medal of Honor around his neck was a private honor, something he kept in a drawer rather than displaying prominently. In his later years, as his health deteriorated, Doss faced financial struggles. Medical bills accumulated from his service-related conditions. he and Dorothy faced the possibility of losing their home. Fellow veterans and church members rallied to support him, raising funds to cover expenses and ensure that the man who had saved so many lives wouldn't lose his home in his final years. The support demonstrated the impact he had made on those who knew his story, the respect he had earned through his courage and humility. Dorothy died in 1991, and Desmond remarried in 1993 to Frances Dumont. He continued to face health challenges, including a battle with cancer. In his final years, he was largely confined to his home in Alabama, dependent on care, but still mentally sharp and spiritually strong. He died on March 23, 2006, at the age of 87, surrounded by family. He was buried at Chattanooga National Cemetery with full military honors, the conscientious objector, who had become a celebrated war hero, finally at rest among the soldiers he had served. The 70 years between Hacksaw Ridge and widespread recognition of his heroism represent a cultural journey as much as a personal story. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, Doss's brand of heroism was too complicated, too challenging to institutional norms, too philosophically problematic to celebrate widely. The military gave him his medal, but didn't make him a poster child. Society honored him quietly, but didn't embrace him publicly. His story remained known primarily to those who had served with him and those who shared his religious convictions. But by the early 21st century, the cultural context had changed. The certainties of the Cold War had given way to the ambiguities of the War on Terror. Simple narratives of American military power and righteousness had been complicated by experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan. Religious conviction was viewed more sympathetically by some segments of society. The possibility of serving courageously without embracing violence appealed to generations wrestling with the morality of American military interventions around the world. The decision by Mel Gibson to make Hacksaw Ridge represented a bet that modern audiences would respond to Doss's story, that his particular combination of faith, courage, and pacifism would resonate in contemporary culture. The film's success validated that bet and brought Doss's story to millions who had never heard it. Suddenly, 7 decades after the fact, Desmond Doss became the hero he had always deserved to be recognized as. The irony is profound. The military that tried to discharge him, the fellow soldiers who mocked him, the society that was ambivalent about conscientious objectors, all eventually came around to recognizing that Doss represented something important, something valuable, something worth celebrating. But this recognition came too late for Doss to fully appreciate it. He died 10 years before Hacksaw Ridge made him famous. He lived most of his life in relative obscurity, known to few beyond his immediate community. The belated recognition raises uncomfortable questions about how we construct historical memory and whom we choose to celebrate. If Doss's story was worth telling in 2016, wasn't it worth telling in 1945? If his heroism deserved to be widely known, why did it take 70 years for that knowledge to spread? The answers point to institutional biases, cultural prejudices, and the political uses of war narratives that determine which stories get told and which stories get buried. The military had reasons to be ambivalent about celebrating a conscientious objector, even one as brave as Doss. Institutions protect their prerogatives and their self-concept. A hero who challenged fundamental assumptions about military service was a complicated hero, one who couldn't be easily incorporated into propaganda or recruitment materials. Better to give him his medal and move on than to make him a symbol of alternative approaches to military service. Society more broadly wasn't ready for Doss's story because it challenged comfortable categories. Americans wanted clear heroes and clear villains, soldiers who killed the enemy and won battles. A pacifist hero complicated the narrative, raised questions about the necessity of violence, suggested that courage might be demonstrated through means other than killing. The culture of the 1940s and 1950s, with its emphasis on conformity and its suspicion of those who questioned authority, had little room for a hero as unconventional as Doss. But cultures change, and what seems threatening or problematic in one era can become inspiring in another. Doss's story found its audience eventually, when cultural conditions made it possible for mainstream society to appreciate what he represented. The fact that this took 70 years is both a testament to how dramatically culture can shift and a reminder of how long it can take for truth to overcome institutional resistance. The lesson of Desmond Doss's story is not simply that courage comes in many forms or that heroes can be pacifists. The deeper lesson is about the cost of institutional bias and cultural narrow-mindedness. How many other heroes remain unknown because their heroism doesn't fit expected patterns? How many valuable stories remain untold because they complicate official narratives or challenge institutional assumptions? How much wisdom and inspiration are we missing because we haven't been willing to look beyond conventional categories? Doss saved 200 lives through extraordinary courage, selfless service, and unwavering commitment to his principles. He did so despite institutional opposition, social prejudice, and physical danger. He proved that it was possible to serve honorably without compromising core convictions, to be both a pacifist and a patriot, to demonstrate courage through saving lives rather than taking them. His story deserved to be celebrated immediately and widely. The fact that it wasn't represents a failure of imagination and justice. The military buried his story not through active suppression, but through institutional indifference. They gave him his medal but didn't promote his example. They honored him formally but not publicly. They allowed his story to fade into obscurity because celebrating it would have required confronting uncomfortable questions about military culture, religious accommodation, and the nature of heroism. The burial was bureaucratic rather than malicious, but the effect was the same. A hero unknown, a story untold, a lesson unlearned. The eventual recovery of Doss's story suggests that truth has a resilience that outlasts institutional bias. Good stories persist even when institutions try to bury them. Heroes eventually get recognized even when recognition is delayed. But this resilience should not make us complacent about the failures that delayed recognition in the first place. Justice delayed is justice denied, and the 70 years that Doss spent in relative obscurity represent a denial of recognition he earned through blood and courage. Today, Desmond Doss is finally recognized as one of the great heroes of World War II. His story is taught in schools, shared in military training, celebrated in popular culture. The recognition is deserved and overdue, but it comes with the bitter knowledge that for most of his life, Doss lived without the widespread recognition his heroism merited. He lived knowing that the military had tried to reject him, that his fellow soldiers had abused him, that society was ambivalent about his brand of courage. The soldiers he saved knew his worth. The men of the 77th Division who owed their lives to his courage never forgot what he did. Captain Jack Glover, who had tried to have him discharged, spent the rest of his life expressing admiration for Doss and regret for initially misjudging him. Those who witnessed his heroism firsthand understood what he represented and told his story within their circles, but their knowledge didn't translate into broader cultural recognition until decades later. The question that haunts Doss's story is why it took so long. Why did the military bury his story for 70 years? The answer is complex and involves institutional biases, cultural prejudices, timing, and the political uses of war narratives. But the answer also involves a failure of moral imagination, a failure to recognize that heroism can take forms that challenge our expectations, that courage can be demonstrated through means we don't anticipate, that the greatest warriors might be those who refuse to carry weapons. Desmond Doss saved 200 lives. He earned the Medal of Honor through extraordinary bravery. He proved that faith and courage could coexist, that pacifism and patriotism were not contradictory, that one person following their conscience could make a profound difference. His story deserves to be told and retold, celebrated and studied, honored and remembered. The fact that it took 70 years for this to happen fully is a reminder of how institutions can fail to recognize greatness when it doesn't fit expected patterns. But now his story is known. Now his heroism is celebrated. Now his example inspires new generations to think differently about courage, service, and the relationship between individual conscience and institutional demands. Desmond Doss finally received the recognition he deserved, even if it came too late for him to fully experience it. His legacy lives on, not just in the soldiers he saved, but in the idea that one person, following their deepest convictions, can change the world and challenge the most powerful institutions to reconsider what they value and whom they celebrate. The soldier who saved 200 lives and whose story was buried for 70 years has finally taken his place among the greatest heroes of American military history. It took too long, but truth eventually prevailed. Desmond Doss's courage, faith, and determination could not be buried forever. His story has emerged into the light, and in that emergence lies a lesson about the power of individual conscience, the importance of challenging institutional assumptions, and the resilience of truth in the face of institutional indifference. He was a hero whose heroism was too uncomfortable to celebrate immediately, too challenging to institutional norms to promote widely, too philosophically complex to fit into simple narratives of military valor. But he was a hero nonetheless, and eventually the world recognized what he had always been. The 70-year delay in recognition represents both a failure of justice and a testament to the fact that true heroism ultimately cannot be suppressed. Desmond Doss saved 200 lives, and his story, finally told, may save countless more by inspiring them to follow their conscience, serve with courage, and believe that one person can make a profound difference even when the world seems determined to silence them.